It's time to retire inequality for good. That's a very powerful sentence, but it reeks with virtue signaling. It only takes 1 second of critical thinking to understand how stupid of a sentence that is. For those that don't know, there's a commercial that has been released recently by Retire Inequality Foundation, which is a paid partnership with the TIAA Bank. This commercial focused on one simple statistic, and that is 54% of Black Americans do not have enough savings to retire. There's a whole dance routine that was created to illustrate this point of Black Americans not being able to retire. They really focused on this 50% statistic in this commercial. I'm going to explain today why that commercial and that statistic is very misleading. First, I'm going to read a passage from the Retire Inequality website to try and explain who their target audience is with this website and this commercial. There is a retirement crisis in America, and it's left hard-working Americans unable to retire securely. As a retirement institution, we are on a mission to retire inequality. So in addition to closing the 30% gender retirement gap, we are also focused on 54% of Black Americans who, due to system of inequalities, don't have enough savings to retire. That's a lot to unpack. But the first thing I notice is a retirement crisis in America. I mean, retirement has only been a thing for about 100 years, like the early 1900s. So to say there's a crisis, that's a stretch. I mean, we'll see later on that their claim is retirement should be a fundamental right of all humans, which is a fine argument to make. I just still think saying that retirement is a crisis when there's a lot of other things you can focus on is very amusing. Next thing I want to look at is the 30% gender retirement gap they were talking about. The thing about retirement is that it doesn't care what gender you are. Your gender has absolutely nothing to do with how much you have in retirement. Your retirement is strictly based on how much you save and invest for your own retirement. So if you don't save and invest a lot for retirement, you won't have a lot for retirement. If you do save a lot and invest a lot, you will have a lot. Your gender has no effect on the outcome of your investments that you make. Let's focus on the main statistic that we're talking about, the 54% of Black Americans who do not have enough money to retire. Where did they get this statistic from? The statistic comes from the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. And the study doesn't say that 54% of Black Americans don't have enough money to retire, but that 54% of Black Americans are at risk for falling short for retirement. This percentage is calculated by the National Retirement Risk Index, which is basically a percentage of the population who is at risk for not having a secure retirement based off of the current working population now. And the study basically tries to find discrepancies within retirement preparedness by race. Now, before we get into this study, let's explain how the National Retirement Risk Index is calculated so we kind of know what we're talking about a little bit more. The National Retirement Risk Index is calculated by comparing household projected replacement rates, or retirement income as a percentage of pre-retirement income, with target replacement rates that would allow them to maintain their same standard of living. Simply put, based off of how much you have saved and invested, and based off of historical economic data, do you have enough money to retire living the same lifestyle at the age of 65? Basically, the National Retirement Risk Index is based on if your projected retirement income is more than 10% lower than the target retirement income. And your target retirement income is based off of your current standard of living. So that's how they got 54% of Black Americans are at risk in retirement. Basically, 54% of Black Americans have a projected retirement income that is more than 10% lower than their target retirement income. And their target retirement income would be their current level of consumption and spending that same amount in retirement at the age of 65. Immediately when I saw this, I noticed a problem with calculating retirement security this way. What are people's current standard of living? Everything about retirement and your target and projections, it's all based off of your current level of consumption and your current standard of living. And the big thing is that currently 64% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. What this means is that 64% of Americans are living above their means, meaning spending more than they're actually making. So their standard of living is higher than they can afford right now. This standard of living is just not sustainable. Not even in retirement, but it's not sustainable right now while they're working. So immediately this National Retirement Risk Index is already off to a bumpy start. It doesn't really calculate anything that well, because we're talking about people who are trying to retire at a certain target that they can't even live right now. So what makes you expect them when they're stopped working to be able to keep that same standard of living when they can't even hold that standard of living right now? A better way of comparing retirement risk would be to see your household projected replacement rates with your target replacement rates that would allow them to live at the means of their current level of income. This means that based off of your current level of income, what are your means of living? What are your standards of living that would match that current level of income? And then use that as the target for retirement and compare your projected retirement income based off of your savings and your investments and past historical data, and compare that to the new target. But that's not how this study does it. They do it their way, and that's fine. We should just keep that in mind with this study. So, T refers to the statistic that 54% of Black Americans do not have enough money to retire. We already know that that's misleading based off of what the study says. The study says that it is 54% of Black Americans are at risk of not reaching their target. And that target is also misleading. So we know that Tia already misunderstood the first part of the study. The next thing is that when they say, they only mention in the ad and on their website about Black Americans. That's it. They only mention 54% of Black Americans don't have enough money to retire. They do not mention any other race. And what they're doing there is that they're implying that there is a difference between Black Americans in retirement and other races in America in retirement. They're trying to say that there's a problem with Black Americans retiring and there is not a problem with others, and that's why you should care about retirement, because it's affected Black Americans differently than other races. But it's funny because if you look at the same exact study that they got the 54% of Black Americans, 48% of white Americans also fall into that category, and 61% of Hispanics fall into that category. So we're not talking about large discrepancies here. And in the ad, to make it sound better, they even said 50% of Black Americans. And so you're talking about 50% of Black Americans and 48% of white Americans. It's not different. Why do they even mention race if that's the case? Why even bring that up? Just say 50% of all Americans. But no, they're trying to tug at the heartstrings. They're trying to grab your attention through virtue signaling. That's exactly what that ad was. It was just pure virtue signaling. And if you want to break it down by nominal numbers instead of percentages, the number of white Americans that are at risk in retirement is roughly about 111 million, while the number of blacks is 22 million. If you're trying to help the most amount of people in America, and for some reason you want to help the most amount of people based off of race, you should really be helping white Americans, because there's like 5 times as many people who need help in this category. Now, if you really want to help the most amount of people, you just don't even include race. Just say we need help. We need to help people in retirement. That's the way to help the most amount of people. But maybe they weren't going by a nominal. Maybe they want to look at percentages, because percentages are important to look at too when you're looking at statistics. But if that was the case, why didn't they mention Hispanics? 61% of Hispanics are at risk in retirement. So not only did they not choose the race that was the most nominal amount of people who are at risk, nor did they choose the group that had the highest percentage of people at risk. They specifically chose Black people because they knew that was the best virtue signaling tool in our current culture. I just find it very funny how TIAA really just decided to cherry pick the data points that they wanted from this study, and not only cherry pick the data points, but then also like misinterpret the data points that they cherry picked. It's just all over the place. Basically, the study comes down to is your retirement risk is all about what you invest in. It has nothing to do with race at all. So basically, if you had a higher income and higher standard of living, then your retirement target is much higher. So therefore, you need to save up more money. Versus if your standard of living is lower and your income is lower, well then your target retirement income is lower, so you don't have to save as much. So these percentages, the only difference between them is what people invest in. If you make bad investments, you're going to have a lower retirement income and you might be at risk of not reaching that target. Versus if you invest in good assets, then you will have more money in retirement. But notice how the ad doesn't mention that race has nothing to do with it. And they really just tried to imply that race was the issue. And they actually said that race was a problem on their website. So it's due to system of inequalities. What they have on their website is the opposite of what they said in the study. They said in the study, since home equity is a major source of retirement income in the National Retirement Risk Index, the decline in home ownership combined with the decline in home values has hurt minorities, and the story has been particularly bad for Hispanics who bought homes in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's about your investment choices. It is not about your race. So I started to wonder, why is Retire Inequality and TIAA trying to focus strictly on Black Americans? And I've come to two theories. One I think is a little more reasonable than the other. The first is just virtue signaling, and it makes sense to target Black Americans. I mean, the heartstrings are pulled in America when you talk about Black Americans. That's all it is. It attracts a lot of attention when you mention statistics about Black Americans, much more than if you were to talk about any other race. That's just the truth. That's the way it is. So I mean, like, the whole idea about the bank is that they want people to invest with the bank. That's all it is. They want your money, right? That's what the ad is for. They don't just put ads on TV just to waste money, right? No, they're trying to make money off of this. And maybe just talking about statistics about Black Americans is the best way for them to make money. I don't know. But the second reason is a little further down the rabbit hole, and it's about TIAA Bank trying to sell you annuities. Now, I'm not going to go deep into explaining how annuities work, but basically what it is a guaranteed income for retirement. And the longer you live, the more you get out of your annuity, right? So as soon as you die, you don't get your annuity anymore. But if you live a long time, then you can get a lot out of your annuity. You can get more than you put in, right? So the idea is that the annuity is that you want to give money to the bank, and the bank says, okay, when you retire, I'll give you X amount of dollars every month for the rest of your life. You don't have to worry about a thing. It's a really great way for a guaranteed income, but that's only if you live a long time. So who do they not want to sell annuities to? They don't want to sell annuities to people who, on average, are going to live longer, because that means they're going to be spending more money for their retirement. They're going to be losing money in the long run, these banks, if people live longer. Right? So they're trying to sell annuities to people who buy an annuity, retire, and the next year die. Right? That's the goal of the banks. I mean, may sound a little crass, but I mean, the bank is in the business of making money. They're not in the business of caring for people, even though this nice ad may seem like they are. So basically, down this rabbit hole is the bank is trying to look for people who are going to die young to sell annuities to. Now, the average life expectancy of a citizen in the United States is around 76, 77 years old, while Black Americans have a life expectancy of about 70 or 71 years, which is about 6 or 7 years younger than the average US citizen. Right away, the banks would want to sell it to Black Americans because they're saving themselves 6 or 7 years of annuity payments. What's even crazier is that if you look at the life expectancy of Black males in America, it's even worse, in around 68 years. Now, all these numbers change year to year, so these figures might not be exact, but it's an average. It's pretty accurate. It's good enough for what we're trying to do. The average retirement age is 65, and black Americans or even black male Americans retire at 65, that means these banks would only have to pay annuities to these people for 3 years, or maybe a little more, maybe 5 years. But compared to the average, which would be 12 years or higher, if you're a white woman, your average life expectancy is 85 years. That is 20 years of annuity payments. Now, why would a bank try and sell annuities to someone who's going to live for an extra 20 years after retirement? Basically, what I'm trying to say is the bank might specifically be targeting black Americans to sell their annuities to because of the fact that they get better returns on selling annuities to black Americans than they do other races in America. The ad is virtue signaling because it looks like they're trying to be generous and kind and help out black Americans, when in reality, most other Americans in the United States are in the same exact boat as them, but they're taking advantage of black Americans because they know they can get their highest returns from them, and they know they can pull at the heartstrings of Americans by using statistics of black Americans. Or maybe they don't know what they're doing and they don't know how to read a study.